of them. Around the country, they're funded by DHS and state and local governments, tens of billions of dollars. You don't even hear about them. And who advises fusion centers on the intelligence sort of threats presented by Muslim Americans? Usually the same hacks that are appearing before congressional committees like Representative King's. And so there's a ton of money in it. And it's all untrackable, unaccountable, invisible. These are private sector actors who are basically making money off the defense contracting industry by pimping out supposed expertise to government agencies. And in fact, the Washington Post, which is hardly a bastion of inflammatory sort of like, you know, flamethrowing, they were talking about the credentials of these supposed experts and how completely flimsy they are. These are basically bigots who profit off their bigotry and don't even purport to have real expertise, and they're who your tax dollars are going into. So I think in terms of grassroots campaigns to address that underlying reality, intelligence collection is a threat to the constitutional rights of all Americans, full stop, period. We have a lot of opportunities to address it, not at the federal level because Congress and the major parties are already gone, but at the local level where grassroots communities can set the discourse, we have immense opportunities. So in 20 cities around the country, my organization is working on multi-ethnic campaigns that bring together Latino communities, interests in resisting intelligence collection with respect to ICE, Muslim, Arab, South Asian communities, interests with respect to defending Fourth Amendment standards vis-a-vis the FBI, groups across the color continuum that share an interest in enforceable measures to stop racial profiling, not just in the war on terror or the war on immigrants, but also the war on drugs and routine criminal law enforcement. And we basically have a policy platform that addresses all of those issues at once, very much with the goal of giving people of all kinds a reason to get together, plan something together, host documentary screenings, you know, reach out to the editorial boards of their local newspapers, march in the street if they have to, do meetings with their local Congress people. These are all things that we, the people, can do, and we can set the agenda if we act proactively. And if that's an opportunity that appeals to anybody here in particular, please come talk to me afterward. I'd love to share more with you.
Thank you very much. One bit to add on the rise in Islamophobia, and this was something I observed as I was writing the report for CARE on Islamophobia, which will be coming out soon. But if you look at just the Muslim part of what's been going on in the country lately, immediately after 2009, I would suggest to you that our country got really angry. The tone changed, and you saw it in things like coffins being left on the front lawns of Congress people. When they were voting for the health care bill, there were calls going in saying snipers are being deployed to shoot your children if you vote for this legislation. And it kind of went from there. Southern Poverty Law Center is reporting a growth in white supremacist groups. And then what happens, though, is you see Fort Hood happens, and then you have the Christmas Day bomber, and then you have New York Times Square happen, Park 51 happens. So you have this sort of series of incidents. So after September 11th, we had a huge spike in anti-Muslim incidents, and then it kind of started leveling off. And now it has no chance to level off. And Islam is front and center on everybody's TV screen, and it's almost inevitably something negative. So keep that in mind. Clarion Fund, for anybody who's not familiar with it, this is a group run by a gentleman named Raphael Shore. What they did is they made a movie in about 2005 called Obsession. Imagine if somebody took all the really horrible clips of you and your family possible and put them into one movie and then sent it out to everybody, what kind of an impression that would make. That's what they did with Islam. They found everything negative they could find. For a couple of years, nobody even really noticed the movie. Then right before the presidential election, they distributed millions of copies of these things with newspapers in battleground states around the country. Battleground states are those states where we don't know if it's going to go Democrat or Republican. And the idea behind it, I would suggest to you, was to just scare people into voting Republican, frankly. The very interesting thing here is that at first nobody knew where this money came from. You're talking millions of dollars. And more recently, there's been some excellent research written, and of course the guy's name just went right out of my head.
Justin Elliott.
Justin Elliott, thank you. He shows it was pretty much one guy donating millions of dollars. So as Shahid says, one thing that has happened since 9/11, there is a lot more money available to those people for whatever their agenda who want to go after the Muslim community. Some of it is, hey, I'm getting a lot of jobs out of Homeland Security, so it's good for me to make these people look scary. Others have other agendas.
Any other questions? I'd ask you to come up here. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thanks for coming. I just wanted to ask, a lot of people have been saying, you know, this is such a typically American phenomenon, but it's definitely not uniquely American. I was living in Europe, and you certainly saw a dramatic rise over the past few years in Islamophobic legislation in different countries. Switzerland comes to mind. I just wondered if you had any, you know, comparisons to draw or lessons, either positive or negative, that stand out to you, comparing the Muslim community in America's experience with other communities, for example, in Europe, if you have any international comparisons to make.
I'll actually keep it in America. And I do want to say, we deal with this phenomenon every day. And when we're talking about this, I don't want to minimize the concerns over Islamophobia. It is a massive concern. But if I had to be a hated minority anywhere in the world, I'd like to be it in America. Thank you very much. Remember, immediately after September 11th, there were Christian groups that went out and surrounded mosques and said, nobody's going to attack this institution. I've seen in other countries where there was massive payback, shall we say, to the minority that was blamed for whatever happened. We saw some of that here, but not to the extent that it could have been. So again, American principles always core to any conversation. I think the American people have overall shown themselves to be people who have great principles. I hope we stay that way. I, like Shahid, fear what might happen after the next attack.
One of the observations I'd make about the distinction here is that a lot of what you witness in Europe is driven by a secularism, right. That it's a fight against their values. So a burqa ban in France or people praying in the streets is a concern because it's a challenge to the secularism. What you see in a lot in the United States is not a challenge, at least to the values, as much as it is at least manifested by a lot of these actors that we're talking about, a national security challenge, that they pose a unique threat to America, and that's the reason. I think that my concern personally in the United States is that the European argument becomes an American argument, because if that were the case, then you have a joining of the left and the right in America. You have the right concerned about Islam's national security threat in the United States, joining with the left's concern about challenge to secularism in America by Muslims. And I think it's something that is real, but hopefully we don't experience, and we're at this crucial stage where I think
best community to study, Japanese Americans. Only other minority blamed for an attack on the United States. Took them 40 years. They got the government to apologize to them. That's the model we have to learn from.
Any other questions? I mean, go ahead. We have about 10 minutes.
I'll just say while you're coming up, the other difference that's pretty conspicuous between European Muslim communities and American Muslim communities relate to socioeconomic sort of distributions and immigration patterns. So you have a lot of the, like if you go to the Oldham riots or the French riots, a lot of that is compelled, you know, just by economic frustration, quite frankly, discrimination in the workplace, you know, an inadequate set of opportunities. Here, you know, the communities are situated very differently, largely just as a consequence of the U.S. immigration system. You know, immigrant populations are basically cherry-picked. You know, going back to Malachi's point about imperialism, it manifests as brain drain abroad. But what it looks like here is that, you know, you end up with people generally who come from around the world who, you know, in a generation established themselves. And so it's a very different sort of socioeconomic community here in the United States than it is in Europe. And I think that that also explains a little bit of the different ways that in the last 10 years. It's interesting, if you go back to the cycles, extremism was more of a concern in Europe first, before the United States, right? The 777 bombing, was it, right? Or attempt in London. You know, those predated the plots here. All of the plots here, they started well after that. And I would argue that a lot of that, the reason you didn't see it for 10 years, was that it took a decade of bullying, housing and employment discrimination, profiling by law enforcement authorities, coercion around serving as informants. It took a decade for the FBI basically to alienate enough Muslims that they would start entertaining these plots.
All right, with this question, I'm going to kind of circle us around to the beginning with Katie Couric's suggestion of a Muslim Cosby show. Recognizing and acknowledging the sort of flawed and naive basis of a suggestion like that in Muslim Cosby Show, what would your suggestions be for outreach efforts or PR efforts to, you know, kind of try to teach Americans that the majority of Muslims are completely nonviolent, recognizing the flawed basis of that kind of outreach?
They told me to shamelessly talk about the play, so I will. I mean, it's a good question. I know many people say it's very naive and simplistic what Katie Couric said, but I think she was onto something. I don't think she assumed that a show in itself, by itself, would magically cure all the bigotry and stereotypes that exist about Muslims. It doesn't work that way. When the Cosby Show came out, there was also Raisin in the Sun. There was also hip-hop. There was also community leaders like Jesse Jackson. There was also civil rights leadership movement. Martin Luther King right behind me. Gays and lesbians have been trying for what, nearly 3 decades. Angels in America, when it was published, it didn't magically change everything. Or when Billy Crystal was on Soap, wasn't it? Did I just date myself as being really old? Right. Go, give me something quick. Or Adam Lambert. Adam Lambert. Yeah? No? He's American Idol. It's over. I'm old. Yeah, Three's Company. Okay, Three's Company. Thank you. Thank you. Save. You guys useless. But the point is, you know, how do you do outreach? I really believe this, even though, look, we need to tell our stories. We need to communicate our stories through a popular medium that reaches a mass audience and a mass global audience. Because the Gallup poll, you guys have heard about this Gallup poll that was done comprising nearly views of nearly 1 billion Muslims, came out 2 years ago? People didn't do anything with their heads. Awesome. So I'm going to say, yeah, one person, thank you. So a Gallup poll was a comprehensive poll done of Muslims comprising 1 billion Muslims all around the world. And they said, what do you dislike most about America? Or what bothers you most about America? What they said is, we love American values. This is something, for those of you who don't know, this is very important. Muslims around the world said, we love American values. We love American freedoms. We love American democracy. We love American work ethic. We love American technology. We love American education. That's why so many immigrants come here. What are you angry about? They said, we dislike American foreign policy. We dislike the perception of Muslims in American media. We dislike how we're portrayed as terrorists. So if you're talking about foreign policy and cultural domestic diplomacy, what you do for outreach is you get these stories out at a young age, I think at the ground level. People I was going to say misunderestimate. Ever since Bush said that, I've been saying that. I've been saying repudiate and misunderestimate, because I've said it so many times.
Just quote him, that's all.
Yeah. Bush said that, Palin. But like the play, for example, the play, you know, we released the play, Domestic Crusaders. It's about the day in the life of a Muslim American family, all right? Everyone at the beginning told me that it won't translate, that people won't like it. What's the code word for people in mainstream? White people, thank you. Because they said there's brown people, and it's about brown characters, and it just won't translate. I said, I disagree with you. I wrote it for a global multicultural audience. From the beginning until now, one of the biggest supporters of the play have been Jewish Americans and African Americans, and even the Muslim Americans, okay? And when people come to me after they see this family, a story about a family who happens to be both Muslim and American and Pakistani, they go, first of all, we really love the play, and second of all, we didn't know this stuff about what Muslims and Pakistani Americans go through, and number 3, we didn't know you guys are as messed up as us. And we didn't know you guys are as similar as us. I have the same discussion with my daughter that Kulsum had with her daughter. That was amazing to me. People just don't know. People don't know that muhajjabas, women who wear hijab, listen to music and speak English and, you know, like boys. You know, and people don't know that some Muslim guys like dating white women who aren't Muslim. And some people are religious and some people are less religious. And so this book, this play, was first as a play and is now being taught in universities. I gave my first Skype session to 120 students at University of Minnesota. 95% of them were the people, mainstream. And all these kids dug the play, they wrote reflections, and they said, the character's story was like my story. That character reminded me of my brother. I didn't know Muslims went through that. There's a scene of racial profiling at the airport. He goes, I really didn't know that Muslims felt like that when that happened to them. I was able to walk a couple of feet in their shoes